Good morning, everyone. So on behalf of Academic City University, I am honored to welcome you all to today's lecture, themed Building Research Partnerships for Sustainable Development. My name is Prince Ajin Mboating. I'm with the Admissions Department. I'll be your host for today's event. I would like to extend welcome to our distinguished guest who has taken time out their busy schedule to be with us today. To our esteemed speakers, facilitators, and participants, I welcome you all to this lecture today. And we have an exciting program lined up for you, and we are confident that the next hours will be informative, engaging, and enriching. Before we come on to our program, I'll call the President and Provost of Academic City, Professor Fred, to give a welcome address and also introduce our speaker. Thank you.
Thank you. Good morning. Good morning. All right. Thank you all for making time to be here this morning. As I was walking in, my PR guy gave me a cheat sheet to introduce a man that I've known for at least a quarter of a century. Wole has been a friend, a brother, my PhD advisor, a mentor, and any other thing you would like to add to that. In this room are two of his former graduate students. So if you know yourself, can you self-identify? Thomas Ipuro and actually two, okay. So you can tell his umbilical cord is here at Academic City, and we appreciate him making time with his team from Sunny to be here with us. Thank you for coming. So Wole received his bachelor's degree in mechanical engineering from King's College London. Before that, he was born in Stanford, California, when his dad was a PhD student, and I've had the opportunity of meeting him as well. The question I've never asked Wole is, how does it feel like growing up with a PhD father? He had his PhD in materials engineering from Cambridge University in the UK, and he was a research scientist at McDonnell Douglas Research Labs. He was also an assistant and associate professor at Ohio State University, a visiting Martin Luther King associate professor at MIT, and a professor of mechanical and aerospace engineering at Princeton University for almost 17 years. That was where our paths crossed. Professor Soboyejo also served as president and provost of the African University of Science and Technology in Abuja, Bernard D. Gordon, Dean of Engineering at Worcester, interim president at Worcester Polytechnic. In 2023, he was appointed the 7th president of the State of New York Polytechnic University, SUNY Poly. He's the author of 5 books and more than 400 papers in peer-reviewed journals. Professor Soboyejo is a member of the U.S. National Academy of Engineering and fellow of the World Academy of Science, the African Academy of Science, the Nigerian Academy of Engineering, the American Society of Mechanical Engineers, and the American Institute for Medical and Biological Engineering, and Material Society of Nigeria. I'm proud to call him my PhD advisor, and I can tell you without his contributions, I would not be here today. So welcome to Academic City, and my crib is your crib. Thank you.
Can you hear me? Can you hear me? So what I'm going to share with you today is the nuts and bolts of how you build universities of different types and how you sort of make decisions on what to dedicate your life to. And it turns out that it's more than just a story of how you sort of build research partnerships. It's really how you live a life of purpose. And so to really understand this, there are many pieces to the argument. I'm going to tell you a little bit about my story, just so you can understand fundamentally what it is that drives me and where it comes from. And everybody has a story. And in the end, by the way, there are 4 stages of life. So in the first stage, as you grow up, the things that happen to you should inspire you in one way or the other. And each one of us has those sources of inspiration. In the second stage, you do work. And that second stage is one where you are responsible for certain things that are given to you, and you do work. And in many ways, it's probably the best stage, although you don't know it. In the third stage, you supervise other people doing work, and you lead some team. And if you're successful, it's because the team that you have has the right team dynamics. In the fourth stage, you start complaining about everybody, and they encourage you to take early retirement. So I'm trying to stay in this second stage, but I'll tell you the story of my life so you can understand that. But for those of you that want to build research efforts, I'll talk about how you build small research efforts. I'll talk about how you build group research efforts, and how you build centers, and also how you build institutions. And each one is intriguing in terms of the lessons of life that I have to share. So I want to start by really thanking all those that have made it possible. So Fred was a student and a friend, a family friend. In fact, my wife and his kids all felt like one family in Princeton. And quite honestly, I consider every member of my research group to a member of our family. So according to my wife, I have 74 kids who are our PhD students, who are all members of our family, some of whom are here. And they now have kids, so it's like they have grandkids. And I believe we even have great-grandkids through this thing. But of course, my colleagues, both here at Academic City and also at SUNY Poly, they form part of an extended family for me. And I start with this because the key, of course, is all those people that surround us, including our students, our faculty, and our staff. And when you treat all of these folks as part of one family, you build a very successful enterprise. But in all honesty, though, if I were to really be honest about how I got here today, is I had really solid parents. My father, who is an engineer, taught me math and physics. My mother, who was a scientist, taught me biology and chemistry. And that fundamental basis was a fundamental basis for life. And I have an excellent support structure in my family, and those that grounded me. And those that grounded me, of course, are my advisors. My PhD advisor was a guy called John Knott. He was the best person in the world, but he was a guy with whom I drank tea and I joked around. But he gave me a way of thinking about problems that took complicated things and made them simple. And of course, I thank all of these people. I also show pictures of political types, because what I found is if you want to make impact, you need to have a team that includes them. And so President Obasanjo has been a great supporter of mine. I had a 10-minute interaction with him, which led to the creation of the African University of Science and Technology. And I point this out that he did it totally for the good of Africa. Most recently, I've had interactions with President Kagame in Rwanda. And he also has a vision. And often, to achieve the things that we want to do, we have to team with political types, we have to team with scientists, students, and make it all work. And so I want to just acknowledge all these people. Now, if you really want to understand where it all came from, it's very strange. So I was born in Palo Alto in California. We only lived there for a year, but I was born at a time when my father was a PhD student in engineering. He was the first person of African descent to get a PhD in engineering from Stanford. And he tells the story of when he went there, they weren't really sure if he was going to make it. And so in his first term, they advised him to do some courses, and he got straight A's. And so he got invited to meet the president. Then they were curious and said, well, we won't register you yet for the PhD, do a master's. So a year later, he did a master's. A year later, he did something called an engineer's degree. And then in his third year, he finished his PhD and collapsed. But what's interesting about him is during that period, he gained a lot of experience beyond what he learned in the classroom. So he used to work for a consulting company called Pregnus Matthews, and he learned how to design high-rise buildings. So when the family went back, he designed most of the major high-rise buildings in Nigeria. And I would be taken in to his practice, and I would see all these buildings go up. And I got this idea that engineers do big things. And it's natural for them to do big things. He also took me to his classroom, where I would see him just joke with his students and have fun. And I would say to myself, this is what I want to do. So from the age of 5, I knew I wanted to be an engineer and a professor. And I had this idea that anything is possible if you put your mind to it. And ultimately, I remember asking him, what is the secret to doing all these things? And I expected him to say, do more mathematics or do more physics. But what he said was teamwork, which I never forgot. And he was absolutely right, as I will try to show in this presentation. Now, it's interesting, though, how this blended with an education can shape how you think. And so earlier on, I went to school in Lagos. For those of you that are from Nigeria, you know school is very competitive, full of a lot of people, very hardworking, very brilliant. And to get to school, you go through traffic that looks like this. And this process, in my opinion, shapes you and molds you and makes you resilient. You may not appreciate it at the time, but it actually is the source of strength that will serve you for life. And I remember going through this, before going through this at the age of 13 when I was sent to school in England. And of course, there was a lot of order. But what was interesting there is I started doing more experimental work when I went to England, in addition to more cerebral work. And that balance of experiments and theory really enabled me later to be able to go through a very challenging program, first at King's and then later at Cambridge. But what I really found, especially at Cambridge, were these 3 individuals. So whenever you go do a PhD, you're trying to do research, usually it doesn't work out. And I would go to the grad center, and every day I would see this person, Stephen Hawking. And Stephen Hawking will be there with his students, socializing, having fun. And I would say to myself, if he can have that much fun with all the challenges that he had, I got no reason to complain about anything. So although I'd never said a word to Stephen Hawking during my time, he was a source of tremendous inspiration to me, just seeing him there. And I would ride through the backs of the university that was established in 1209. And I would ask myself, what the heck am I doing here? And I hope that I can do something that's worthy of being here. At the same time, I would go to the library every day, and I would see this fellow here. His name is Sir Alan Cottrell. Alan Cottrell was the advisor to the Queen of England for science and technology. But every day he would come and he would check out the journals, just like me. And he would make notes, just like I did. So I said to myself, there must be something here. If Alan Cottrell is doing the same thing that I'm doing, I'm going to keep doing it. So eventually he gave a lecture, a series of lectures, 4 lectures on the theory of metals. And within half an hour of the lecture, I couldn't understand what he was saying. And neither could the department. So I said, this is what happens when you spend your lifetime trying to understand something. And so he gave me this example of how you do research for life, how you do scholarship for life, in ways that served me well. And then this person here, John Knott, was my PhD advisor. And his knack was taking complicated things and making them simple, and then using models to describe and understand them in ways that enabled industries to prosper. As far as I knew, his name was John. We did things together until I went to my first conference and I realized that he was the leading person in the world. So why do I say all this? What they had, of course, was a culture of learning, a culture of scholarship, a culture of research that connected to industry, that connected to government. And it had been created in this ecosystem that evolved since 1209 into where it was. And I realized that they had many of the ingredients that one needs in a research university. So in a research university, important part of this is culture. The people that live and breathe and operate that university establish that culture. And they do so in an ecosystem that connects to industry, that connects to government, that connects to students, faculty, staff, and is not in a rush to do everything, but very intentional in how it does so. It has people who focus their lives on knowledge and understanding. They are curious about the world around them. And that curiosity, of course, leads to a culture of discovery and excellence when it is focused. And in many ways, the theory doesn't have to be complicated. It just has to be informed by the right approach. And it can have experiments that are simple, that have profound implications for discovery and for impact. What was great about this place, by the way, was we didn't work all the time. In fact, I would show up to work around 8 or 9 a.m. We would have a tea break at 10 until 10:30. We would work until 12, then we would have a lunch break. And then we'd take another tea break at 4. And then we go home at 5. But yet, if you look at the Nobel Prizes, if you look at a lot of measures of impact, that place produced that. And that is because we do our most creative work when we have a balance of work and play. And we lose our creativity when we work all the time. And when you lose your creativity, you might as well just give up. And so this idea that really working all the time produces much is totally not true. So, but in spite of all of this, you know, you would go through a place like that. And I remember once going to a conference and I asked my advisor, why are these people working on all these not so useful problems. And he said, money, my dear boy, money. So that was the first time that I started to realize that it takes real resources that they mobilize into that system to run this. But the outcome of all this at the end of this experience is graduates that are well prepared to work, but also with experience have the potential to lead. Now, if I now look at the real world though, in 1988, when I finished my PhD, I actually wanted to come back to Africa. So I wrote 2 letters to 2 universities in Nigeria, and I applied to 100 different places across the US, but I wanted to come back to Africa. So I wrote to the University of Lagos where I had grown up. The letter was sent back to me. It said I spelled the name of the head of department incorrectly. So he didn't get the address wrong to send it back. And the second person said to me, you should get some experience and then come back. And so in the end, I ended up going to work for an aerospace company called McDonnell Douglas. Strangely enough, when I got to McDonnell Douglas, I couldn't really understand why they were interested in me. In fact, I showed up to my hotel room and they had it all programmed to welcome Dr. Soboyejo to St. Louis, Missouri, and blah, blah, blah. And I was thinking, what's the fuss? But it turns out that the fuss was that they needed to design robust spacecraft, helicopters, aircraft that needed a field called fracture mechanics, which is what I did. And I knew how to do this in a way they could translate into practice. And so the work that I did there really showed me how what we do in universities can really enable big industry. And how if one really focuses in an area, those big industries can shape many communities. Each of the aircraft, and they make the F-15, F-18, the commercial aircraft, is many times enabled by this field. And so that was a great experience. And quite honestly, I started learning how to run research programs that drive industry. But I missed being in a university because I wanted to teach. So I volunteered to teach to anyone around, just to blend that together. And I found myself really in a situation where I needed to build partnerships. And I just want to share with you that process. So you show up in a place like this, they have this lab that has 100 PhDs trying to develop the next frontiers for aerospace. And I had a boss at the time, a guy called Charlie Whitsett, who totally believed in me. So he said to me, Wole, you can go anywhere you want to go, you can buy anything you want to buy, I will support you. And so, as an African boy, I could see opportunity. All the labs were there, all the computational resources were there, all the materials were there. They wanted to fly from Tokyo to New York in 2 hours in hypersonic aircraft. They wanted to build a space elevator, which they had a contract for. They wanted to build helicopters with no-tail rotors. And I had the tools to work with the folks in teams to do these different things. But what I also needed to do was to form a network. And so Charlie Whitsett said to me, he said, Wole, you should go to the Air Force labs every 3 months and just show them whatever it is you're working on. And just keep doing that and work on the materials that will drive all these things, and I will support you. And so off I went, and gradually I found that after some time, I started getting into the system. But before I got into the system, it was non-trivial. I called up a guy who ran the programs, and I said to him, I have some good ideas. And the guy said, I fund all these famous people. Why should I fund you? But later, just by going to the Air Force labs, I met many people. They became my network. When that guy retired, one of those guys became the head. And that network enabled me to build from small to medium to large. I say this because all of you, wherever you go, don't just hide where you're hired. You have to go out. You have to form those networks and leverage those networks and be very careful not to offend anyone. There was one case where one of the program managers came to me and he presented an idea that I knew was wrong. And he kept on saying, "What do you think?" And I would say, "Just explain it more to me." And I did everything to look for a positive spin. 6 months later, he said to me, "Wole, you owe me." He said, "You know, I just helped you get 2 National Young Investigator Awards because I like you." And so if I had said to him, "You're wrong," I would not have gotten those 2 national investigators, and he would have become my enemy. So you have to form your networks. You have to be very strategic, and you have to have a goal. And those goals enabled me essentially to form small groups that grew larger. I remember one of those Young Investigator Awards was worth $1 million. And so networking and having a vision counts. And gradually I found myself not only being able to do research, but also to consultant and all that. Decided that he too wanted to join. And so in 1995, he left all his businesses and he came to Ohio State to join me. In the early days, we had a deal. I said to him, "You teach me probabilistic methods, I'll teach you fracture mechanics." So each morning, we would go to a coffee shop. He would teach me probabilistic stuff. I would show him a few things in fracture mechanics. And then we started writing proposals together. And so we were funded. And then we started going to conferences together. And he was able to go from his background in structural mechanics to teaching aerospace engineers at Ohio State. And I was able to learn a lot from him. And what's interesting there is pick your friends and pick the people you interact with in ways that are constructive and start to learn together. And we started with a few grants, and through that collaboration we ended up with one major grant of $3 million. And I say this because, you know, people often try to start there, but you start here with personal friendships. And I formed other partnerships with other faculty. And we started approaching different agencies. And many of these agencies were places where we built relationships and we started having small to medium success. Now I just want to show you some of the things, because after a while these things do happen. So some of the materials we worked on ended up in the many aero engines, initially military engines, but they transitioned to all commercial engines today, use these intermetallics that are now in service. The dream we had was to drive this national aerospace plane, which sees very high temperatures. So we developed these high temperature structural materials, but there were many challenges. But the net outcome was many of these types of components exist today, and it's interesting to be part of the team that made this possible. Now when I transitioned to Ohio State from industry, some guy from Toyota, Tadahiko Furuta, called me and he said, "Professor Soboyejo, I want to come and visit you from Toyota Research Labs." And so we had developed these ways of making in situ composites that reinforce titanium matrices purely by alloying. And those reinforcements form in situ and they bridge the cracks in ways that make it difficult for the cracks to grow. And they basically had modified the method to start making valves and connecting rods and gears. And this was the first time anybody would travel so many thousand miles to see me. And what I realized is as you do your work, the spread and the reach of your work matters in ways that transform industries. These valves, for example, not only improve fuel efficiency, what they also do is they enable you to have much greater performance. And this basically showed me that the impact of what we do can be global. So this was sort of end of the 90s, and there I am, I'm thinking to myself, I'm making lots of hypersonic advanced materials. My mother then says to me one day, she says, what are you working on? I said, I'm working on cutting edge materials, you know, I've got all these resources. Then she said, what difference does this make to the lives of people? And then she made it worse, especially in Africa. So I couldn't answer the question. And in fact, I remember the year I went to MIT on sabbatical, I met a lot of very famous, great professors, but I knew that what they were working on was not what I needed to work on. Because there are lots of people to work on those problems. And the more that I thought deeply about it, the more that I could realize that I grew up in a community where people don't have potable water, affordable housing, basic health infrastructure, and very basic needs. And so I started to rethink my way to answer this question of what do I work on? So about that time, the National Science Foundation in the US started thinking of collaborations between Africa and the US. And so I was brought into a group to have this conversation about what kind of things could we do together that could benefit both the US and Africa. So at this meeting, there were lots of people shouting and dancing and doing a lot of things. But what I decided to do was to write down the different things that people said they wanted to do, and then figure out a way of making this happen. And this was about the time that I was invited to go to Princeton as a professor. And so I said to the folks in Princeton that I'm going to change my lab. In fact, what I wanted to do was work on materials that really make an impact in addressing problems in health, problems in energy, problems in water, problems in affordable housing. And I was going to throw the lab open to people that come from all over the world to come and work on those topics, even if I'm not the world's leading expert in those areas. But by working in teams and thinking about how we address these challenges, we could do work that provides solutions that scale. And so this led to different ways of identifying the diseases that kill us most in Africa. Problems of cancer represent 22% of all death, cardiovascular disease 30% of all death, problems of water purification, and problems of renewable energy, and problems of sustainable buildings. Now, in doing these kind of things, what I realize is that you have to create your own ecosystem. And so we started really with the idea of, first of all, fraternizing with program managers that I knew wanted to work on these things, and then engaging them and visiting them to the point where we could really begin to frame something where you can say what you want to do, say how you're going to do it, and say who benefits at the end. By the way, if you ever want to write a proposal and you cannot say these three things, don't even start. Say what you're going to do, say how you will do it, and say who will benefit at the end of this. And then the next thing is you build teams. And you build those teams around people that you trust and people that you know will deliver. You avoid people who talk too much and don't deliver so that you're reliable, and you work forward. So even before you get funding, you begin the work, because most projects are research reimbursement exercises. You've done half the work. And by the way, you don't present all your results in each report. So you always have work to report. And you always anticipate site visits, because they will certainly happen. And you have to make sure that the students, the faculty, the staff are all well prepared before any of these things happen. And if you do this, in some ways, it's almost like you're a conductor of an orchestra, where you pull out different pieces of the music at the right time. And that's how you go from ideas to reality. So in our lab, the way we've run our lab is we basically have many visitors from Africa, many US students. These are some examples of some of those visitors. What we look out for is potential, not just the initial capability. And we bring these folks together in teams, and magic happens. So in the process of doing all this, it turns out that whilst at Princeton, the head of the World Bank, a guy called Jim Wolfenson, was also chairman of the board of some place called the Institute for Advanced Study. The Institute for Advanced Study is where Albert Einstein worked when he was at Princeton. And I used to go there to hide. And so one day they came to me and they said they wanted to establish these Nelson Mandela institutions. And they basically wanted some inputs on the vision. And so the origin of this was apparently a discussion that the head of the World Bank had with all African leaders. He asked them what was the single thing the World Bank could do to develop Africa. So sitting in the audience was Nelson Mandela, and he said, invest in science and technology. Which, if you think about it, for a lawyer, political activist, it's not necessarily the answer you would expect. And so they showed up with a plan to create the so-called Nelson Mandela institutions. And the vision led to the establishment of AUST. Now, before AUST was established, I was asked to give a pitch. And after I gave the pitch, everybody was excited. On my way back to the hotel, some military-looking guy taps me on the shoulder. And he says, the head of the Capital Territory wants to see me. So I go to see the head of the Capital Territory. He says, I really need to stay and meet Baba. I say, who's Baba? Baba, of course, is President Obasanjo. So the next day, I find myself in a place waiting for President Obasanjo. And then I find myself in this room with him, and I have 10 minutes to make a pitch about why science and technology investment could transform the continent. In 5 minutes, he stopped me and said to the minister, we must do this. And that's how we raised $40 million. And I found myself in a car drawing out over 100 hectares of land for a new university. Now, what I always look back on is, why is it that he was able to make this decision? Then I sort of thought to myself, I said, I really don't know, but it seems to me the only thing I did was I showed that I try to do science, I try to teach, and I'm focused on development. Now, this is important because all of us have that potential, and often we don't even know what it is that we bring, but I think much of the world knows today that science, technology, and innovation are the engines of development. And the aspiration was to raise money to drive this. And so within that context, we thought about the next African Silicon Valley between Mount Kilimanjaro and Mount Meru in Tanzania. which is where the Nelson Mandela AIST is. The idea of Abuja came with the same idea, with a focus on materials and petroleum engineering, and the idea of 2IE as a place with a focus on water. These were places that had a vision, and those ideas enabled money to be raised. And so with the African Development Bank, there was almost $20 million that went into those three institutions. And with the World Bank, there's another 20 million that went into those institutions to establish them. I say this because the vision matters. But what's interesting about Academic City is that it's not only the vision that matters, it's how you deliver that vision in practice. And I would say that the model you have here is a robust one, and it's already showing the value of innovation. Now, just to kind of show you the cast of characters that were involved in the Nelson Mandela institutions, it's quite humbling as I look back on the history of the last 20, 30 years, what this meant was interacting with presidents, convincing them to invest in the next generation. Now, what are the products? I could tell you that these products are here today, people like Yupuro and others. There are some that are professors at MIT. And what that showed to me is that if we have the right teaching model and pedagogical approach and the right dedication that nurtures our students, we can truly produce excellence in Africa. And essentially, this is AUST. And I think you will agree with me, what you've achieved here in Academic City is even much grander at these early stages. This is the African Silicon Valley that we imagined. This is the reality. And I have to tell you, what this showed me is you can have a vision and you can translate it to practice. But you have to remember that universities need to last hundreds of years to transform communities. So what I want to do now is to talk a little bit about interdisciplinary strategies. So what often happens when people try to develop universities is they build departments. And they build core departments and they study one thing and they produce one thing. Now, when you do that, it's very difficult to have synergy because you have to layer upon that the structure you're trying to create through the establishment of interdisciplinary groups. And so I first tested this out initially at AUST, but I also tested this out at Worcester Polytechnic and now at SUNY Poly. And basically you say, okay, people have these core competencies, but where do you want that university to make a distinct impact that collects people from ideas to markets and scholarship in a way that makes you different? And so in the case of Worcester Polytechnic, it was this idea of materials reimagined. And that was the goal, to bring people from different fields to make that possible, from concepts to manufacturing to discovery. And then the other area was in the whole area of bio, the intersections between the life sciences and engineering that create solutions to medical problems in a way that's fully integrated. And by the way, I suggested we should call it BioX. The faculty suggested they call it BioPoint. It doesn't matter. And then the third area was something that was coined as the smart world. It was the AI-driven world in a way that many people in the faculty wanted to connect to. And so what we did was we funded seed ideas, group ideas that allowed different groups to start flourishing at a time when WPI was still ranked as a Research 2 institution. And it turns out that the professors there were interested in global initiatives. And so we gave lots and lots of support to people who were interested in global projects, collaborations actually, with academic city and many universities across the world. And those were the 4 cross-cutting areas that were going to define the image of the university. It turns out 10 years from this introduction, because of the increase in research support and the leveraging of this, WPI went from a research 2 to a research 1 university just this year. And what it created were just so many synergies well beyond what anybody imagined. But we then said we want this institution to have character. We want it to be diverse. We want it to be sustainability as a thrust. We wanted innovation, entrepreneurship to be part of the culture. We wanted to use project-based learning to teach how you do real things as part of teaching. And we wanted design thinking and maker culture to support the whole structure. So in my mind, it's an interesting structure you have to weave as you build community, foster collaboration, establish alliances to drive this vision through. And it's amazing to see how transformational this kind of structure can be as you try to transform a university. So you have to figure out what makes you distinctive. You have to figure out, in this case, it was project-based learning and global projects that really makes that particular institution distinctive. They also have this idea of combining theory and practice. It turns out that most universities in the world have this problem of theory and theory. And most people that are trained in theory and theory can only do theoretical jobs, right? And that's only a small fraction of the jobs. And so this idea of theory and practice and how you blend experiential learning in an area that's informed by research is the key. And then picking areas that not everybody does. For example, at this time, they decided to focus on materials engineering, not material science and engineering, but they realized that their strength was in engineering. They realized that data science was emerging, the intersection between life sciences and biomedical engineering. And then who's ever heard of fire protection engineering? It turns out it's critical in all countries across the world, and they are the #1 program in that area. So be distinctive and pick areas that not everybody picks because they represent tremendous opportunity. So in my journey, my current position is as SUNY Poly president. And it's interesting to see how life can sort of almost come full circle. So I was born in Silicon Valley, and I feel like I'm working in the new Silicon Valley that's being created before our own eyes in the state of New York. So we are on an 800-acre site with 2 semiconductor companies, each an investment of $1 billion each, located on the campus. And there's a vision of this new Silicon Valley as a vision that will bring 21st century jobs to that community and elevate this community with the presence of SUNY Polytechnic. And so when I got there, what we did was to say, okay, what are the big ideas that we want to pursue? And to be honest with you, I've been infected with this idea of big ideas, right? What are the big ideas that we want to pursue? And what's the approach? And we decided the approach is interdisciplinary research and education in a way that leverages partnerships to drive the impact of the university on the community. So once you do that, the student identity we want to have is that all of this needs to drive student success. It needs to drive branding and external partnerships. It needs to drive virtual and real campus infrastructure. And it needs to drive academic excellence in the niche areas of impact. And when you do that, you elevate the region. But not only do you elevate the region, you excite everybody in that region to build towards that common purpose. And so all the major companies in the area, all the politicians in the area, all the sort of major agencies of development basically see us as a vehicle for the development of the community. Now, once you align those things, resources flow. And not only do resources flow, you have to crystallize this in a vision of a new frontier. And so, you have the Raleigh-Durham triangle. In our case, what we have is a trifecta vision. And so that trifecta vision now says we now have some areas of intentional collaboration, linking business and advanced manufacturing as a strategy, linking health sciences and biomedical engineering as a major thrust, and then looking at this intersection between information technology, AI, cyber, and quantum. So in those areas, we're now hiring critical clusters of faculty to interact with our existing faculty to form groups that do research together, that do education together, that do new programs that impact industry. And instead of building new buildings, we're partnering with agencies within an hour of SUNY Poly that are either companies, universities, hospitals, in a way that spreads our impact. And the magic of this is that when you focus on that impact, it's amazing what sort of things happen. The local hospital, which was just completed, and the local biomedical research institute just said to me, we want to have a SUNY label. We didn't pay a single kobo or a single CD for that to happen, but they could see the value of the partnerships, because as we bring resources in, we bring resources in for all. And through this, we're now doing lots of funding of seed centers in AI, in manufacturing, in smart materials, in health sciences, in quantum sciences. We funded 14 centers, each with $250,000, just to play together and begin to do things together. And then out of that, then comes the commitment from the state. $44 million from the state to invest in cutting-edge facilities for robotically assisted manufacturing and additive manufacturing, and also for health sciences biomedical interface. And so this is the governor of the state of New York and our major leaders at the ceremony where they gave the check. And it doesn't just end there, because we're in the middle of a tech corridor where many major companies are flourishing. Our focus is how to meet the needs of those companies. So we don't just engage in research for the sake of research. It's driven by a purpose to support the companies. And some of those companies are right on our site. And so this Danfoss building is the site where you have a major semiconductor company that makes microelectronics for electronic vehicles. And we're working closely, and we've been supported to introduce a clean room for manufacturing. And we've also established a Center for Global Advanced Manufacturing that seeks collaborations with universities across the world, recognizing the era of digital manufacturing. And ultimately, as a result of this, we started to play in a domain of receiving DoD funding. This year we will receive $9 million of DoD funding. So our research revenues are going from 0 to 1 million to 9 million. And next year they will probably go to 10 or 20 million. So there's a lot that you drive through innovation and teamwork. But I also want to share with you just the reality of what this means in this new era of artificial intelligence. Now, it's important to recognize this, because as we've gone through the last 4 industrial revolutions, each of them has created the opportunity for development and wealth creation. And if you don't understand that, then you totally miss the point during that particular era. The first industrial revolution brought steel, The second industrial revolution, brought large-scale automation of manufacturing. The third industrial revolution brought the information revolution of the computer. The fourth industrial revolution is the era of AI and the Internet of Things and the Internet of Services. Now, what's interesting about this era is what it enables in technology. Here I'm showing you an autonomous car that's interacting with its environment, sensing and detecting its position and obstacles, and making decisions, all driven by artificial intelligence, connected to all sorts of devices. Involved in that is a lot of ideas that you can apply to many different domains. And I just want to share with you a few of these domains that are of interest to me. So one of the things that's of interest to me is how do you detect cancer, and especially breast cancer? And it turns out that this is a major problem, and many of the methods that are there are not robust. And so this is a problem that I've worked on for the last 25 years. And one of the most interesting things about this is if you look at many images of tumors from immunohistochemical staining or even optical images of blood, it's amazing how much information can be translated and interpreted through AI as you make these robust processes. So here we're looking at the work of David Clement, who looked at images of IHC stained breast cancer tissues from a library of over 10,000 or so images. And what he found was that these images are taken at different resolutions. And so he created a bag of multi-resolution images that increase the predictive accuracy of detecting the cancer. And if you look at the different models, this bag of deep multi-resolution convolutional features was clearly the best, with very high ability to detect breast cancer. Now, beyond that, we've taken these problems and applied this approach and applied it to the development of the next generation of solar cells. So those are called perovskite solar cells. They have a structure like this. The three components. One is a monovalent cation, one is a divalent cation, and one is a halide. And if you figure out this problem, then you can make the solar cells of tomorrow. So I decided to explore a number of approaches. But first you have to understand the physics and why this. So in this case, these absorbers absorb light. And they're some of the most powerful absorbers of light. And then if you excite them, then you excite the electrons into this conduction band. And so you have transport of electrons this way and transport of photons this way. As they go along trying to get to the electrodes, a significant fraction of them will recombine, so they're lost. But those that make it and escape to the cathode and the anode are available to basically produce light or for storage. Now, if you understand this, then you say, well, how do I improve the performance of this? So I can control the elements that I use or the ions that I use here, but I can also apply pressure to bring the interfaces together. And in doing that, basically that pressure application increases the contacts, enables the charge and ion transport, and ultimately through this method we're able to make solar cells with efficiencies of 23%. Those are better than those of existing silicon solar cells. But the question that I asked is, what can we do to improve these? So if you look here, you see that these things contain defects. You can image those defects with computer vision. And ultimately, with this computer vision, you can relate these defects to the efficiencies and stabilities of these things. And ultimately, you can design the next generation of solar cells with control defects. But you can then go one step deeper, and this is work with the Ghanaian Elvis Chumasi, where you can start doing AI machine learning to design the solar cells of tomorrow. And so if you figure out ways of extracting information from global databases, what you can now do is to develop a model that takes all the sanitized global data and begin to test out which of these models predicts well the efficiencies of all of those data available in the global literature. And basically what we show here is that the random forest approach produces the best description of the data with the lowest error and the best overall mapping of global data. What I'm not showing you is that we identified some new compositions that are even better than anything that's been seen in the world. But as you begin to play, you can now figure out how to control the efficiencies by controlling the architecture of the solar cell. And we found that by applying pressure to the solar cell during fabrication, you increase the contacts and you start getting efficiencies close to the world record. So this combination of AI and experimental and computational physics gets you to a different place. You could do the same with lithium-ion batteries. And in the case of lithium-ion batteries, we've achieved remarkable specific capacity for energy storage. And that application of pressure plus the ability to control composition using AI to guide this process is what we're pursuing. And already we're showing that this has tremendous promise. The vision we have is for people to integrate these into the next generation of electric vehicles. Some of the work on lithium-ion and also supercapacitors will also enable the development of the next generation of energy discharge systems. And as we build, ultimate goal is gigabatteries for homes. The work that's needed is the transition from the research now to the real world in ways that we think represent an opportunity. Whilst I was at WPI, one of the things that we found is a battery recycling company that was started. It grew from an innovation idea to a company that has now value of over $1 billion. So these ideas matter, and how you scale them matters. Then the other thing I want to share with you is an idea that came from a very erratic person. So this erratic person was Professor Adewoye. So Professor Adewoye was the person who said to me, go back and get some experience before you come back to Africa. So one day he was seen wandering around the bushes, plucking cassava leaves. And people thought he had gone nuts. You know, what's this guy doing plucking cassava leaves? So it turns out cassava leaves contain carbon and nitrogen, cyanide. And when you heat them up, the cyanide can deposit in the material. And Tabiria Sumadu here, doing his PhD, actually showed that you form graphene. And that graphene is produced by treating these at certain temperatures in an oven. And he showed that you form these graphene nanostructures that control the behavior of the material. Those materials have essentially zero friction. And because of that, they have the potential for use in many automotive applications and many devices where zero friction means a lot in industry. The good thing is you can transition from this lab scale to an industry in a way that's practical. And I say it's an opportunity for Africa to develop industry around this. Similarly, another student from Ghana, Sarah Osafo, just finished her PhD, where she basically found that she can recycle bone and eggshells into hydroxyapatite nanocrystals that make it easier for implants to interact and integrate with bone. This kind of thing, blended with some human trials, leads not only to an opportunity for making dental screws, but all sorts of biomedical implants that can be translated into real industry right here in Ghana. And ultimately, what I've learned from all this is that fundraising is possible wherever you are, whether you're in Africa, whether you're in the United States. You have to capture big ideas that can be supported by governments, by industry, and by all sorts of folks that want to achieve impact. The important thing is to focus on building partnerships, building teams within a research culture where scholarship matters, innovation matters, where you're always thinking about impact and asking the right questions. You must also have an idea of the impact that you want to have, not the impact other people want you to have, which often sends you in the wrong direction. And as you achieve this impact, remember that the key is to interact with people that want to have that impact. But ultimately, we have to build industry that manufactures, that adds value to resources. And those resources in Africa represent 30% of the resources of the world. So there's no reason why Africa should be poor. And if you use the example of Dangote, we can apply this to our energy resources. We can build industry that adds value. But ultimately, do not make the mistake of thinking that you always have to start big. And so the idea of new enterprises that you can put in containers that contain just the right level of things that you can use to produce, in my opinion, is the secret to how you transition all of these resources into wealth. Invest in the youth as you do this, because they are the future. Get them to really connect to this idea of a STEM-driven future, because they are the future workforce that will make this all happen. And the very last piece of information here. So as I did all these different things, one day I got a call and I was invited to sit on the advisory board of the UN Secretary General. And I was surrounded by Nobel Prize winners and all these great people. And I couldn't believe it, you know, when the Secretary General, as he was framing the concepts for the Sustainable Development Goals, he would come and ask. And I would be in this team figuring out what's going to go in the SDGs. And I learned from this that as you do your work as a scientist, technologist, actually just doing an honest job gets your ideas into places where they matter. And I could tell you those advice that we gave did matter because they were evidence-based. So in summary, what I've tried to do is to share with you my lifetime experience of trying to do research and trying to build universities. It turns out it's really all about teamwork and having a vision. It's also about stubbornness and not giving up, because you will fail many times. But if you believe in what you're doing, you should not give up. But you should commit yourself, your life, to solving problems that exist in our own environment. Just like an artist is inspired by their own environment, you should also be inspired by our own environment to solve problems that matter to you and develop ecosystems for our generation. My last message to you is be the transformation, right? Let your experience and imagineering be your sources of inspiration. Form internal and external partnerships within where you are and beyond. Even when they don't exist, you create them to manifest on the community the change that you're trying to achieve. It's really all about teamwork. And really this idea of a lifetime of continuous learning in a way that keeps you current, in a way that really enables you to project yourself over time and let your passion be the fuel for the impact that you would like to have. Thank you. So at this point, I would like to call my colleague, Bill Thistleton, to say a few words about the AI initiative at SUNY Poly. Bill. Is this going in here?
Well, good morning. As you can imagine, it's not easy following President Wole, but we'll do our best. And I'll be speaking with Steve Schneider, one of my colleagues. One of the reasons I think that we're both here is we have research interests that had us interacting with, to be honest, some students, some graduate students from Ghana, and I was so impressed. I said, we've got to get here and start talking to some folks. I'm going to take a second, see if the slides will come up. But we do have, as Professor Wole, or as President Wole said, there are 14 new centers on our campus, and we're co-directors of one of them in artificial intelligence. And we come at this from very different ways. I'm a mathematician, and just to let you know a little bit about why I'm here. I started out as an engineer. Didn't quite work for me. You know, it was interesting in its way, but it wasn't really grabbing me, wasn't grabbing my soul. So I took a couple of years and I taught high school, and I was teaching high school in one of your neighbors in Cameroon, in Limbe, Cameroon, Government High School Limbe, and that was transformational. And if you kind of look in my soul, you might see a professor, but I think what you're really going to see is a high school teacher. And if I can, you know, give you some ideas on that as we go through, it'll be great. Then I was doing, and I'm going to try to tie in some of the ideas that you just heard. I was doing something called computational fluid dynamics that many of you may be studying or even teaching. Numerical differential equations, hyperbolic, nonlinear systems, all the rest. And as you can imagine, my phone was not ringing off the hook as I was doing that. I was a professor, and I had some engagements, some research, but I moved into applied statistics, and all of a sudden, people started calling me. So there are market conditions, and you want to be aware of that. I started doing consulting in a number of local firms, some of them government, some of them private. And at a certain point, I moved into machine learning, and machine learning led me to artificial intelligence. And now there's just more work than we can handle, just to be honest with you. So part of it is you have to follow your dream, but you also have to be aware of market conditions. Are we going to? Okay. We'll see how much of this I can remember without the slides. Oh, look at that. I need a thing, right? Where do I point this? Point it over there? So now I'll stop rambling and I'll start delivering my actual talk. So we're here to form partnerships to try to understand what you guys are doing in your universities, and maybe share a little bit about what we're doing. I think it's important not to just sort of do abstracted research, but to also pursue funding, because you want to build a structure that's going to last when you're done. Our center just started in June, just a few months ago. But I'm already sort of thinking about the younger faculty who are at SUNY Poly who are going to take over when I'm done with the center. And that takes resources. Now, a lot of this, I believe, let's see, you will have already seen. I didn't know Wole was going to use some of the same slides as me, but I guess I should have assumed that. If I can get past these. This is the worst. When you watch somebody and they don't know how to advance the slides. Is there some secret here? Or I should be pointing over there? What should I be doing? I've got the laser pointer. All right, so we're kind of getting there. So one of the first things we'll show you is some of the projects that our laboratory is working on. We'll show you some of the students that we're working in, with some of the companies that we're engaging, and we'll move on from there. Is that going to do it? What I should do is pull the slides up on my phone, but that would take too long. Well, let's see how much of this I can kind of wing. Or you think it's going to work now? Let's see. And I should be pointing over there. Gets worse and worse. There we go. I appreciate your patience. All right, so our laboratory has three fundamental things that it does. There's a sort of math end, that's where I come in, and we're more on the architecture side. We're spending a lot of time with so-called large language models. And just so I understand you a little bit, can you raise your hand if you're in engineering? And can you raise your hand if you're on the humanities side? Literature, okay. All right, good. So we've got a wide variety. That's terrific. So what I and my students are doing is we're building models, but I guess I'm a little less interested in coming up with the next innovative architecture. There are people who have been in this field for 20 years. They'll do that. What I'm trying to understand is how can kind of normal people, like normies like us, how can we use large language models and be as efficient as possible? And you'll see some of our ideas on that. So building, testing, and developing foundation models. Do you know what I mean when I say foundation model? Not so much? So a lot of the large language models that you hear about, ChatGPT, Gemini, Llama, et cetera, are so-called foundation models in the sense that they're training on everything. They're training on the internet. And I found when I was doing some work with image processing, so one of the things I was doing, how I got into this field, is I was doing generative images, and in particular medical images. I was trying to look at the vascular structure of the human eye, and one of the things that you'll hear people say in finance, in economics, and for this project, you'll hear medical people say, we don't have enough data to train our machine learning models. I found this out. I was working on a project where I had to call literally 100 companies, and I kept asking them, what are your challenges? Over and over and over, people were telling me, we don't have models we don't have data to train our models. So okay, we started doing that. And I was training in a very general way, and I was finding that the images were terrible, just terrible. That's like working on the level of foundation models. You're training on everything, training on the internet. Then people go and they fine-tune the model, and that means sort of finding agricultural applications or medical applications, whatever your field is. And then you get your large language model to be much more responsive to your area. And we were able to have a lot of success doing that with images as well. We have an accelerator, and what we're trying to do there is work with companies. We have a contract with a county, close to us. We're going for other contracts, some big government contracts, where we're trying to understand how do analysts in particular, how do they engage large language models? Are the large language models doing something good for them? How do you tell somebody the best way to use one of these large language models? And I'll talk about hyperparameters in a little bit. Some of you will know about those, and I'll get you there. And so that's sort of the accelerator. Steve always says I get the studio wrong, so I'll just read what's on the slide. exploration, user experience analysis, trying to understand when I think of AI, I don't think about AI. I think about the human AI system, trying to understand the human AI system. Is that close enough? Good. So as President Wole was saying, you can't do these things by yourself. You have to start reaching out for partners. And Steve has his contacts. I've been working, as I say, I've been consulting for years in the Mohawk Valley, some bigs and some smalls. And here are some of the partners that we're working with. Genesis, let me not just read them to you. Let me just say in particular, I had a graduate student, this was just several weeks ago, come to me and say, hey, I've got an idea for a project, and it had to do with wireless and large language models, maybe drones. And that was nice, and I was trying to fund him. And we started talking with South Cottage Industries, and this is somebody that I used to teach with, but also somebody that used to work close to us at the research lab, Air Force Research Lab. And at the end of the conversation, I said, some people are looking at agricultural applications. The guy's a farmer. And so we immediately tasked my grad student into ag applications, and I think that's going to be a marvelous connection. We have some initial academic partners, and the list is growing. We're trying to, as I say, understand how people do their programs, how we're doing our program. I understand that you have a new program in data science. Are there any data science students or faculty in the room? Nobody? You're just going to leave me hanging? Oh, thank you. Even if you're lying, I'm glad you raised your hand. Thank you. So we're just getting going in ours. We'll have our first group of students walk across the stage this May, and we're just tremendously proud. The faculty in our center, we co-direct the center, but again, we were realizing very early that we needed friends. And so we would find people on campus, some of whom we knew, some of whom we were just meeting for the first time. And I think it's important to sort of make this connection. How can I put this? Leadership matters. And I think you're blessed in your leadership at your university. And I'd say we are blessed at our university as well. I'm not going to embarrass you, so I won't look over there. But we had a new president come in. The president came in not only with resources, but with leadership abilities and started moving us forward. And so we're trying to enact in our center some of the things that you heard him talking about in his talk. We have people from psychology, data science, electrical engineering. There's an expression, covering the waterfront. We're trying to cover the waterfront with our center. And this is helpful because there's some large money grants that we're going after that need psychologists. And as a mathematician, I don't typically work with psychologists. We have some grad students, and I can make guesses, but can you raise your hand if you're a grad student? Interesting, you're all professors? Are you undergraduates? Okay. What would make me the happiest in the world would be if next year I come back here and I give a similar talk and I get one of your pictures up here, or 2 or 3 or 5 of your pictures up here. If you're graduating, this isn't a sales pitch, but if you're graduating, if you're looking for a college, SUNY Poly would love to work with you. And I'll start talking a little bit about the projects these guys are working on. The team capabilities, again, we're all over. We have a lot of things that we work on. I'm going to move, I know you've been sitting there, so I'm going to move quickly through some of this. Michael Poso is doing LLMs in agriculture. And again, this is an area that I don't have direct experience with, so I reach out to South Cottage Industries. I reach out to Michael Poso. We're going to make some good things happen. I think what he's really interested in doing is to, I don't want to say low tech, because your cell phone is a very high-tech device. But what he wants to do is to lower the barrier for entry for people in agriculture so that you can walk around your field, take some pictures, and work a large language model, not sitting off in Palo Alto, California or wherever, but on your phone. So I should actually say a small language model. That's his direction. What Leisha is working on are these so-called knowledge graphs. And if you've never heard of a knowledge graph before, it's just a way of keeping track of information, so-called subject, object, predicate. And I started her working on learning Cypher, learning Neo4j, moving along with some of the basic tools. And if this is interesting to you, maybe we can talk about it. One of the things that people study in the context of large language models, and if you haven't thought about these things very much, people will tell you what a large language model is trying to do is predict the next word. Now they do this from, a variety of texts that they've learned on and all the rest, and some predict missing words. But just think about it, predicting the next word. So what we started studying is at the University of South Florida, they have a so-called free association norm. So can I get a volunteer real quick? Anybody? Again, don't leave me hanging. Would you like to vote? It's going to be the simplest thing in the world. Please. I'm going to you don't even have to get up. I'm going to say a word, and you say the first word that comes to your mind. Hello. Hi. Okay, there you go. That's a free association, right? And you can start building graphs, these networks of people some people will say, if I say hello, some will say hi, some will say goodbye, et cetera, et cetera. And so we could build actually what's called a probabilistic knowledge graph off of that. What Leisha wanted to do in particular was to study these free association norms in India, because she happens to be Indian. What I would love to do, I don't know if this speaks to anybody, but with different Ghanaian languages, I know there's one very predominant one, but maybe you have another. If you know of free association norms, that would be terrific. Direct me. If not, maybe we can generate some. The interesting thing of these cognitive sort of devices is they show you what people are thinking. If you haven't studied these, they're fascinating, and they go back for decades. People have been looking at this to try to understand how your brain is processing. So anyway, that's what we're doing with her. With Harshif, I'm trying to get him, and this is maybe interesting to you. If any of you are on the data side of things, maybe not even as a major, but if you've had basic statistics, you've probably looked at design of experiments at least a little bit. And within design of experiments, right now there are tools, Google has a new one, that will essentially design your experiment for you. Now, do you trust it? Not necessarily, but it gets you moving. And so Harshif is designing experiments for people to engage large language models and in such a way that they have access to the so-called hyperparameters. And we can talk about that again if that's interesting to you. Several things we're doing within AI in education. I'm going to quickly move to this because maybe this is interesting to you. Here's something that I'm looking for partners on, and I know that your university has done summer work with high school students that you can certainly be proud of. I just started working with this journal that does high school research. It's hard enough for some graduate students to do research, I realize, but there are high school students around the world, and we'll see if we can find some in Ghana, who can actually do some research. It gives them structure, it helps them move forward, gives them something to think about outside of the classroom. And this journal is always looking for referees, but it's something, if it calls to you, if you'd like to work with high school kids and you'd like to mentor high school kids, that's a partnership that I think we can be very productive with. I think we're getting into Steve's part, right? Corporate use cases. Why don't you come on up? You can talk about Herkimer County and all the rest. Thank you.
Good morning, moving into good afternoon. Always difficult to come after Wally and to come after Bill. And could someone remind me what time we're supposed to, how much time we have here? 5 minutes, 10 minutes? 15, okay, thank you. I'm actually going to skip that slide. Uh-oh, now I'm into Bill's territory. There we go. Okay. So I started my academic career as a graduate student when the internet was new. And I was very interested in understanding what impact the internet was going to have on people's lives. This was pre-web, just after computers were showing up in ordinary people's houses. There's still an internet before the web, but it spoke to me, and I'm a political scientist by training. My graduate work is in political science, and I wanted to understand if we have this internet, and I could see where it was going to progress. I was working in a lab that we were inventing the internet, although we didn't know it at the time. I wanted to understand what impact would that have on people's politics? What happens when people can talk to each other? So I went through a whole period of work where I studied how users engage with this technology. And that took me many years. I did a little detour into administrative work and returned to the faculty after a period of time, and AI was there. And so I asked the same questions. I can apply the same methods that I used 20 years earlier with the internet. Maybe we can apply the same methods to artificial intelligence. So what I became interested in is what I call the interplay between people and AI, the human-AI interplay. And I try to do it in these 4 areas. We're breaking it down, and it turns out that it's a relatively new area, so we're breaking new ground, and I would love to break ground with all of you. I look at AI as both a medium and a tool. It generates content, and we use it to do things. And so the content that we generate with AI is like generating content on the internet and television and print, et cetera. Very interested in understanding who's powerful in this relationship, who's got the data, who's controlling access to the AI, and this I think is particularly important around the world. It's very important in the US, it's very important in Ghana, it's very important everywhere, and it's not the same. And so those differences become really important to us. I'm very interested in this collaboration. I think when I'm using AI, I'm collaborating with another entity. It's not an intelligent entity, but it's not a person. I know that, I understand that, but if there's a presence there that's generating. I was talking with your president a little bit earlier, and he says, we're concerned about plagiarism, and I come back and I say, well, I don't really see that as plagiarism. I gave the prompt, that's what created the response. I have ownership of that content, so I'm very interested in, do I actually create something that wasn't there when I started? And I think I do. Many of my colleagues are not quite sure that they agree with me. And then I'm finally, there's a lot of undergraduates here, which I understand. I opened my class for first-year students. It was their first day of college because I teach on Mondays. And I said to all of them, you have to use AI. And they were shocked because they thought, well, we're not allowed to use AI in college. But I want them to, and I don't want them to have just one prompt and a response and give me the response. I want them to have a conversation because I want them to collaborate. And collaborating with the machine is not something that humans are used to doing. So that's what I'm interested in. And then I'm finally very interested in this knowledge production. What influence does it have? And so that gives me an understanding of the interplay. The way that I explore that, I advance what we call AI user research. This is the studio that Bill, he did okay, but not great, right? I think we need to demystify AI. It's mysterious. Where does that come from? And in order to make efficient users, we need to demystify it. We need access. You need access. My students need access. Everyone needs access if we're going to understand it. I recently, in our AIX, it took us a little while because everything is new, to get access to ChatGPT for members of our lab. And you would think that would be easy, but then I have to go to the procurement officer and explain what a token is in order for them to approve the purchase order to buy tokens. Or, how do we run accounts? And those are new things. And every step in a university, as you're familiar with perhaps, requires some work. So we need to promote access That takes money, that takes resources. And then finally, there need to be rules. We need to govern it. I don't know if you have a policy at a city. I don't know if you're allowed to use AI. I don't know if your professors tell you what you can do, if they know when you use AI. But there needs to be some governance, and then certainly in Ghana, in all the African countries, in fact, in all the countries around the world, including the United States for sure, there need to be some governance conversations. Who allows people to use it? What's allowed? So those are the 4 areas in which I'm exploring this interplay. And I'm going to focus on the yellow box here, because the yellow box at the bottom of the next 4 slides is an invitation. It's an invitation to all of you, to the undergraduate students, to the graduate students, to the faculty, to the deans, to the president, to collaborate. If I'm studying users in the United States, I would love to have partners doing the same project with the same surveys, the same methods in Ghana, because it's in the differences that we're going to really understand what AI does. If I just do it with Americans, that's only going to teach us about what Americans do. And this is a global technology in a global world. So I'm very interested in comparative cross-cultural studies using shared data collection, analysis tools, and techniques. This replicates a study I did with elections. I studied how the web was used in elections. We had a year-long project with 25 research teams in 25 different countries using the same methods that we built, the same questionnaires, and then we could talk about how was the internet affecting elections in a particular year. And I think we'll do the same with AI, and I hope that you'll participate. That's an AI-generated picture, by the way. I hope everybody recognizes that. It took me a few prompts, and this is part of the demystification process, so I want to highlight this. It took me a few prompts to get the AI to generate a multicultural image. You can't just, you say, show me a picture of demystifying AI, and it looked like it was taken at my university, but I said, no, I need a multicultural approach, so you have to push on the models to get it to do what you want. That's the point that I'm trying to get across. I'm in the process of developing training programs, so we're going to go to some of the workplaces that Bill was talking about, to a social service agency with 1,500 or 2,000 employees, and we want to show them how to use AI. That requires creating slides and doing this kind of a workshop, but we should do the same workshop here, and we should work on it together so that we understand how to train people around the world to use similar technologies. So that's the opportunity of developing and sharing training materials. Providing access turns out to be not only expensive, but complicated. For example, at a city, if they decided to purchase a license to ChatGPT so that everybody could use it, well, what does that mean? And how do you do that? Perhaps you don't go directly to OpenAI to buy that access, but you find another provider who provides equal access to all the different models. Those techniques of promoting access, I think, is a really important part of what we're doing. And finding money, finding resources that we can share, so that we can each have access and that we can develop that in a partnership. And even evaluating services and doing reviews. Is this a good product? Is this an unfair product? Is this a product that appears to generate answers that seem to reflect the biases of the training materials? How do we get over that? Like my images here, every one of them required additional prompting to get the kinds of results I wanted. If I only look at service reviews from a single culture, from a single professional, if they're only engineers, I'm not an engineer, thank you for the humanities people, but if we only listen to what the engineers tell us, we're not going to really make progress because everyone needs the tools. So we need to share those multiple service reviews. And then finally, we need to develop rules and processes so that everyone knows what's acceptable. So I suspect undergraduates here, like undergraduates around the world, AI is so new, generative AI is so new, some of your professors know, some of your professors don't know. All of us should know what's acceptable and what's appropriate, and that's some of the work that we're trying to do at AIX. We have to make sure, though, that those rules are generated in an environment that's respectful of all cultures, all professions. I have a formulation that I think about it is multifaceted diversity that we want to promote as we're developing AI. We want it to be, I always imagine a table that we're sitting at, and around the table we want different cultures to be represented, different disciplines to be represented. We want young people and older people, so we have multi-generations represented. And if we don't do that, then we're just going to develop this technology that will largely, I fear, will exclude people and will exclude their perspectives. So that's one of the things that we're working on. I went quickly because I know that you've been sitting here for a while. I'm not going to do all the questions and discussion, but I wanted to close by just suggesting, this is the first time I've been in Africa. I've been here since Saturday morning at 7, and it's, I'm absorbing a lot. It's a lot. It's very different than the culture that I'm used to. I've traveled a bit, but not to Africa before. What I really emphasize, the reason that we came here and the reason that we took this trip, besides the inspiration from President Wole, is really to build partnerships and to build relationships. We came on the plane, there were 25 students from New York University, which is a large private university in the city of New York. There were 25 students from NYU getting off the plane, and I was watching them and say, okay, next summer I want to come with 5 SUNY Poly students, bring them to a city so that they can spend the summer with you. I would love that. I don't think I took my 15 minutes, but I wanted to make sure that you had some time to ask President Wole some questions. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you so much for your lectures. We appreciate it. Please, we will take questions for our speakers. We will take 3 or 4 questions for our speakers. If you have a question, kindly raise up your hand. And it's your name and your program, then you let the question come.
Okay, can you hear me? Great. So my name is Mighty. I'm a 3rd-year biomedical engineering student here at Academic City University. If there's one thing I've seen so far, it's the fact that you've talked about STEM, right? You've talked about technology, science, and how its incorporation into today's society is very important to us as young individuals and as adults as well. My question, however, is how do we bridge the gap between business and STEM, right? I know we have a lot of business students in the room. We have a lot of undergraduates who are studying something apart from STEM, right? How do we bring these people on board in the discussion? How do we incorporate these people in our field instead of trying to make it only STEM related? Thank you.
I'll take a stab at that because I'm not a STEM person. My training is first in political science, and then I kind of migrated to media production. But I've spent my career at SUNY Polytechnic Institute, where the other faculty and the other students were engineering students, technology students, engineering technology students, and I always thought that my students benefited from that. I think the way you do that is through collaboration, and through the classes that you have, When you're sitting next to an engineer and you're a humanities student, take advantage of that, because those are the people that the engineers are going to have to work with. As a humanities person, I sort of understand what Bill says when he talks about foundation models, but just being in the presence of his graduate students helps me understand that. So I really think it comes down to collaboration and interactions. Now you'll get the truth.
You know, I think the real opportunity is at the interface between STEM and business. So just to illustrate what I mean, I was approached by a business school that has no STEM. And so they said, well, we have these business plan competitions, but we don't have any technical innovation that's driving the business. On the other hand, if you connect those technical innovations to business, then you have a range of opportunities to develop new sort of STEM-motivated businesses. So finance becomes fintech, right? Within that context, when you innovate in any way, that interface with business becomes innovation and entrepreneurship with real tangible contributions. And generally speaking, innovations that do not have that business component that connects them to demand do not drive impact. So the real opportunity you have is to really build partnerships. Like if I were a student in the business programs here, I would connect to the innovators who've made this technical widget or this new financial instrument, because that STEM-oriented business is really where you create the value. So it's not competition, it's actually collaboration that you really have the opportunity to drive. And within that team, you all create value. And without each other, by the way, you don't create value.
Yeah, my question goes to Professor Wole. Yeah, I'm very much interested in how you achieve the efficiency of the semiconductor material by using pressure. And as the wave is very small in nanometers, how could you do that?
That's a really good question. And the story behind that, by the way, was I had a colleague that wanted to apply pressure on very thin wafers. And in the end, although it's not obvious, we finally decided you need something that's very compliant, that wraps itself around the structure. And when you apply just static pressure with a dead weight, it actually works very well. Now, as simple as that sounded, by the way, it led to a patent behind the LED fabrication, on which I still earn royalties today. But essentially, if you use a soft slab and you apply dead weight pressure, you can achieve the low pressures that we're actually applying to get the effects. And essentially what happens is those conforming surfaces and the uniformity of the pressures improve the surface contacts. In the absence of those improvements, you're essentially just relying on charge transport through many imperfect interfaces. In the presence of those contacts, you increase those contacts at the interfaces as well as the percolation of the particles that then allow the transmission of charge. And basically the key is that charge needs to get to the electrodes within a certain time, otherwise it recombines. So that's the simple idea. And the remarkable thing is it's worked now for not just solar cells, but for LEDs and also for batteries.
Again, how do you, because the impurities also increases. but you have a lot of impurities in this material. And by using pressure, how do you also eliminate the impurities of this material?
So there are a couple of things going on there. If you're referring to the impurities within the material, then the processes are done within some glove box environment with some environmental control. And then the surfaces are cleaned in a way that minimizes surface impurities. But those surface impurities are there. And what you do is you need to model the surface contacts around those impurities and understand how those compliant surfaces wrap around, and then apply pressure to those interfaces. The great thing which I didn't emphasize about these perovskite solar cells is that you don't need to have a clean room environment to make them. And the reason why we focused on them and not the silicon solar cells is that in the absence of not needing a clean room environment, it makes these relatively easy to do in an African environment in ways that can scale.
Thank you, Prof. So because of time, we cannot take any more questions. But Prof, we have a culture in Academic City. Wherever we have a guest, we appreciate them with gifts. So we have a gift for our speakers. Prof, Dr. Senna, please come up front so we can do a presentation too. Prof. Wole, please come up stage. Thank you. Beautiful. We have Prof. Kevin Rayhill, Director of International Student Services. Please come up stage. We'll have in Lester Royal Dawson, International Admissions Counselor. Please come up stage. Professor William Joseph Tittlestein, Associate Professor of Mathematics. Please come up stage. Professor Stephen Schneider, please come up stage. Dr. Asumadu Tebri. Thank you. So I think we are done with the gifts. So Dr. Senna will give us the closing remarks. Then we head up to the reception.
So I guess it's thank you. Coming in here today, I wasn't sure what to expect, but my head is in a lot of places. I don't know about the audience. My head is just in a lot of places. Not to mention the engineering pieces that came up that got me wondering, okay, is everything about materials? I guess materials is fundamental, right? So it does contribute in a lot of ways. Now, that said is the lessons on leadership, not just leading an institution, but leading self and driving self towards where you want to get to. Those were very profound for me as well. Being able to connect to what inspired you, what got you even on the journey you are on. And I was sitting there just wondering, okay, what are the things that contributed to me getting to where I am? And even very importantly, where did I want to get to, and am I on that track? And the third piece for me from all of this conversation is that if we do it together, we can actually succeed. What we need is that, that common vision which we have, that leadership that drives us towards that vision, and just contributing bit by bit. And you were very emphatic about that as well, that we don't start by building a nation at once, but it is the little communities coming together and putting the little pieces together, and we can together actually build and make it happen. Now, this is very timely, I think, for us, because we've just received our charter. I mean, it's been a few months, but I like saying we've just received it because we are still working. We have a lot of work to do. And sometimes when I wake up in the morning, I've been here just 10 months, but when I wake up in the morning and I think about everything that has been done, and it's been mind-blowing work that has been done up till now, and what we need to do now to get us to where we want to get to, sometimes I wake up feeling a little overwhelmed. But I think about the fact that there's a family working on this together, and I get that reassurance that, you know what, we can make it happen. And your lecture sort of brought that to life for me, that you have actually lived that, and it's working from university to university, and it's actually a proven concept, so we can actually do it. So thank you for those great insights and for giving us the hope that we can actually make that happen. And thanks for sharing all those amazing opportunities for collaboration. Our faculty team is young. Our undergraduate program is, expanding. Our graduate program is young. And we are looking for opportunity to work with, people who understand and appreciate that even though we are young, we still have value to bring to the table. And that is a kind of assurance that I have received from you. We have, I guess it's the first AI program on the continent. And, we are working hard at building it and making it what it's supposed to be, and listening to both examples of programs that you're running, research opportunities, etc. I see how we can collaborate, and I'm looking forward to conversations to explore those as well. So thanks a lot. To the audience, thank you very much for being here. I see academic leaders, students, faculty members, our president. Thank you all for being here. And the international office, thanks for coming to host your meeting here. I hope it went great. So thanks everyone, and let's have a lovely rest of today.
Thank you, Dr. Tena. Please, exec members and our guests, please follow Mr. Sushil for a short network event. You follow Mr. Sushil for a short network event. Thank you. Please, let's take a group picture. Let's take a group picture, please. Please, let's take a group picture.
Is it on stage?
Yes, please. Please come on stage and let's take a group picture.
let's take a picture and we move, please. Please come up stage, let's take a picture, please. Please come up stage, let's take a picture. Please, let's come around for a short picture, please.
Photographers, please set up. Please set us up. Okay.
Reception.
ACT exec and our guests, please head to the reception area. ACT exec and our guests, please kindly follow Mr. Cyril to the reception area. Thank you.